Hey, it's Leonardo here with another do-it-yourself Valkyrie video. And this time we're going to be talking about the carburetor assemblies. Now I got to tell you, maintaining your carburetors is probably the most important maintenance task you can do with this bike. The reason for that is you want to avoid the hydrolock issue. That's when you get a constant fuel supply pouring into your engine when it's turned off. One or more of your cylinders ends up filling up with fuel. That ends up blocking your engine, so when you try and start it the next time, your starter motor turns, but your engine can't move, and the gears that connect your starter motor to the engine can end up cracking. You can even end up cracking the rear case of your engine. So I'm going to show you the parts you need to replace to make sure that never happens to you. So I went ahead and flipped that assembly over, and now we're looking at the top of our carburetors. We're going to open that up and take a look in a second, but first I want to talk about the tools that I like to use and maybe what you shouldn't do. So I know I'm breaking rule number 1, but I do like to use my drill as a power screwdriver. Now the only reason that this is safe to do is that, as you can see, my drill has a clutch. So you don't want to ever put this up toward the top where you've got a lot of torque, but keeping it down in the 1 to 3 range, I found out, as long as I'm careful and make sure that it gets a good bite, it seems to work well for me. So let's go ahead and remove those 3 screws, and here we are with the diaphragm. So on each of those 6 cylinders, you're going to remove that top metal cover. Next is a plastic cover underneath, and that has the receptacle for your diaphragm spring. Now that spring is what keeps your needle seated up against the jet, and that cuts off the fuel supply until you get a vacuum that pulls the diaphragm back, and that pulls the needle back, which opens up the jet. So let's call this the diaphragm assembly, and as you can see, there is a needle of which I speak. So how do we open up this assembly and get to that needle? See, there's a little hole there, and conveniently it has the same threads as the screw that holds on our top cover. So just put that in there, pull back on it, and you'll get a little snap. And with that snap, our plunger assembly comes out. So let's talk about this plunger assembly. As you can see, if you look inside of there, there's a tiny little second spring, and that pushes against the needle. Make sure it's seated. It's about the size of one of those ballpoint pen springs. Now this needle, obviously this isn't our stock needle. This is a third-party performance part from Cobra. And I'm going to zoom in here a little so we can get a real close look at this assembly. So on this side, the stock needle is a lot more gradual, but this one has a really shallow point, as you can see. So as soon as your jet opens up, pretty much you have a full flow of gasoline into your chamber. Supposedly it's going to give me better performance, better acceleration, just because I got more gas sooner. And let's turn this around and take a look at the other side, because we've got our C-clip there, as you can see. And look, it's got several lines, so you can decide how deep your needle needs to get pushed in. And that's the spring that pushes against that C-clip. Make sure your needle is pushing up firmly so you get a nice cutoff of the fuel when you're not hitting the gas. All right, so that is how you get to the needle to replace it. Let's talk about putting this thing back together. So down in that little chamber, there is a hole where our needle must come out of at the bottom. So you drop the needle down in there, comes out the other side. The C-clip stops it. There are a couple of gaskets that you could put in there to control your needle height also. And then you put your plunger assembly back in. And again, you're going to get just a little snap right there. And you can remove that screw now. And your plunger assembly is ready to go back in. Now, this can only go back in one way because let's look at the chamber here. One moment. All right, so this is a chamber where that diaphragm goes in, and you can see it's got a little back plate, a little slot for the back plate there. So you can only put this in one way. And there on our assembly, there's the little wings that will slide into that slot. And the only trick is you've got to get that slot lined up. You've got to get the jet hole at the bottom lined up. And you got to get your diaphragm seated correctly. Oh, another quick thing. Make sure that your spring is giving you a good pushback on that needle and that your spring is stiff enough so it's adjusted enough so that the needle stays straight. That way, you can put this back in correctly. So here is the simplest way to get that diaphragm lined up along with your needle. You want to invert it, and I can't stress this enough. You want to make sure all of your seal gets down into that groove. That way, when you put the cover back on, you don't pinch the diaphragm and allow fuel to drip out of there. So once everything is seated in there correctly, you want to put your spring back in, right in that little center post there. You're going to put your plastic cover back on first and make sure that you get the spring lined up in that receptacle and then push straight down on it so you don't get a kink like that in your spring. You want to make sure the spring is straight down in there. All of your seals are lined up, and then you put the metal cover back on, and that's it. You've just replaced a jet needle in your Valkyrie carburetor. Put those 3 screws back on, and you are all done. So we're going to flip this over, and we're going to talk about the bottom side.